We find ourselves in a peculiar position at universities all over the world, especially at universities. People denounce the West, and yet they also want to come to the West and live in the West and enjoy Western prosperity. Because, despite all our current struggles, the way of life that we have established in countries such as Australia and the United States remains the wonder and the envy of the world. And by way of life, I mean something more than material comfort. I mean our culture. The signature achievement of the West is our commitment to the dignity and freedom of each individual. We do not have slaves or serfs or peasants. We do not have hereditary castes. Instead, we have representative government. One man, one vote. We have rights that extend to everyone. Everyone is equal in the eyes of the law. Again, historically speaking, an extraordinary achievement.
The University of Austin is America's newest university, dedicated to forging the next generation of America's founders.
What is the purpose of higher education? It's the pursuit of truth, basically for the good of human flourishing.
Today, the majority of students and faculty members across higher education are not comfortable, in many cases, saying what they actually believe. This is really detrimental because education can't take place unless you are allowed to make mistakes.
These are going to be students that are burning to have an environment where they can ask a question without fear of retribution, and that kind of curiosity enables learning in every discipline. A curious student learns history better, a curious student learns politics better, and a curious student learns mathematics better.
We are creating a role model for all the universities because they've lost their way.
UATX is what a university should be. Vision that hopefully will inspire not only the creation of other new universities, but will help to stimulate existing universities to return to their fundamental original missions.
Professor Patrick Gray is UATX's Dean of the Centre for Arts and Letters. Previously, Gray served as Director of Liberal Arts at Durham University, where he was responsible for designing and introducing a new interdisciplinary core curriculum in the humanities.
Please welcome to the stage the University of Austin's Professor of Literature and founding Dean of Arts and Letters, Patrick Gray.
Hello, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. Everyone seems to be having a grand time, and so I hope you won't mind if I talk to you for a bit about the University of Austin and about what I see, the possibilities here in Australia. I'm here to bring you a message of hope and say things can change. It was not that long ago in the U.S. that we conservatives also felt ourselves to be in dire straits. And yet things have turned around. So, I'm very relieved, I must say. Things can change. So, we find ourselves in a peculiar position at universities all over the world, especially at universities. People denounce the West, and yet they also want to come to the West and live in the West and enjoy Western prosperity. Because, despite all our current struggles, the way of life that we have established in countries such as Australia and the United States remains the wonder and the envy of the world. And by way of life, I mean something more than material comfort. I mean our culture. In the English-speaking world in particular, we might say that the Anglosphere, we have a well-deserved reputation for fair play, honesty, rule of law, and freedom from corruption. And I think that those of you who have lived and worked in other countries will know just how rare and precious those ethical standards are. So here in the West, we are, or at least I'm sad to say we used to be, a high trust society. So women can leave the house without fear of being assaulted. Politicians can disagree with each other without fear of being assassinated. This kind of civil society is easy to take for granted, but it is fragile and it is an extraordinary achievement. The legal rights, material affluence, and physical security that we enjoy as citizens of countries such as Australia and such as the United States are an inheritance that was won by centuries of conflict and debate. We are the heirs of a long and distinguished tradition dating back to Israel, Greece, Rome, Europe, England. We are part of Western civilization. what does that mean? I would say the signature achievement of the West, and Tony spoke about this eloquently as well. The signature achievement of the West is our commitment to the dignity and freedom of each individual. We do not have slaves or serfs or peasants. We do not have hereditary castes. Instead, we have representative government. One man, one vote. We have rights that extend to everyone. Everyone is equal in the eyes of the law. Again, historically speaking, an extraordinary achievement. In the early days of the United States, just after the Constitutional Convention in 1787, a high society lady asked one of our founders, Benjamin Franklin, what was the result? Well, doctor, what have we got? A monarchy or a republic? And he said, a republic if you can keep it. And what he meant was that the liberties we enjoy require sacrifice. Citizens must be informed and they must be involved. Every generation has to make a choice and an effort to support the institutions that make our civilization possible. This task is especially challenging and especially urgent now in our own historical moment because we are contending with people who seem to desire nothing more than the destruction of everything that our ancestors and we ourselves have worked our lifetimes to build. Most immediately, politicians on the left seem intent on overrunning the West with millions of unvetted, uneducated, unskilled immigrants, some of them actively hostile to the West, without giving due thought to the question of assimilation. But I am here today to talk to you about a different kind of immigration. To quote the philosopher Hannah Arendt, every generation, Western civilization is invaded by barbarians. We call them children. So it's true. I have a 3-year-old myself. I understand. Every year, millions of little savages, basically, are born into our midst. They know nothing of our language, our religion, our culture, our values. There's a saying that it would only take a few days of missed meals for any society to decline into anarchy. Likewise, it only takes a society a generation or two to revert to barbarism. So if we don't train young people to love and defend Western civilization, it will degenerate into chaos very rapidly. And that is what we are starting to see. For example, before I started working at the University of Austin, I was teaching Shakespeare and directing a program in liberal arts at the University of Durham up in the north of England. At first, it was wonderful. It was the #1 English department in the UK. So some of my colleagues were astonished that I would give up this job at a well-established university and go move halfway across the world and work in a cubicle at a little startup. But others understood, because those of us who wanted to teach the Western canon were under siege by Bolsheviks. Decolonizing the curriculum, land acknowledgments, pronouns, Black Lives Matter, anti-racism, et cetera, et cetera. Every year it was something more and more and more. I saw courses on classical philosophy, the Bible, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, replaced by courses on things like anti-capitalism, ethnic grievances, postmodern nihilism, the transgender self. Being a conservative in a typical university today is like being a curator in an art museum and watching hoodlums break in, burn the paintings, topple the statues, spray graffiti everywhere, and then set themselves up as if they were deserving of applause. And, yeah. So happily, what I am here to tell you today is that an alternative is possible. What once seemed to my colleagues, and I will confess at times to me myself, like a wild-eyed madcap gamble, an experimental venture, the University of Austin, is now a big success. We received our license from the state of Texas, and we are on a fast track to accreditation. In the past 3 years, we have raised more than $200 million US in pledges and donations. We found ourselves a beautiful Art Deco building in the middle of downtown Austin, and we are in our second year of leading undergraduates through what I honestly believe is the best education available today in the great books of the Western canon, as well as entrepreneurship. We are recruiting elite students with in the top 5% of test scores nationwide. We are even drawing transfer students from Ivy League institutions such as Dartmouth and Columbia. As we said in one of our advertising campaigns, they burn, we build. But we do need allies. If we want to fix higher education, there is a tremendous amount of work still to be done. What really brought this home to me and to many of our supporters was the reaction on American campuses to the events of October 7th last year. As Scott mentioned, large, sustained protests broke out on multiple campuses, denying that Hamas had committed atrocities, denouncing Jews, and calling for an end to Israel's existence. Meanwhile, despite very basic, obvious offenses, insults, intimidation, outright violence repeatedly directed against Jewish students, many university presidents proved unwilling to step in, regulate the protests, and restore order. Called to account before the U.S. government, they gave these sort of mealy-mouthed, responses. They refused to take responsibility. And at that point, the American public, I think, started to understand. It's not a few activist professors. It's not a few naive students. It's top to bottom. The problem in higher education is endemic, and it will take serious effort to root it out. With that battle in mind, we need to change how we think about higher education. Conservatives need a new approach. First, we need to think beyond hard power. We need to think long-term. Winning elections is great. It should be done. But it is not enough on its own to secure a lasting conservative majority. We have to win the hearts and minds of younger generations. Second, we need to reframe and redefine what we mean by academic freedom. The American conservative William F. Buckley Jr. famously once wrote, "I would rather be governed by the first 2,000 people in the Boston telephone directory than by the 2,000 people on the faculty of Harvard University." Now, when I read this as a younger guy, I thought he was sort of joking or exaggerating. But now that I'm older, now that I've seen the inside of academic politics, I wholeheartedly agree. I 100%. So to understand why, I think it may help to understand the process of becoming a professor. It requires long years of specialized study, long years of artificial isolation, like a flower in a greenhouse. There's a reason why we have the stereotype of the eccentric professor, the absent-minded professor, the professor who's not entirely in touch with reality. I mean, I like professors, but I used to be one. But the reality is focusing on one small area of technical expertise is no guarantee of good judgment. I think we all saw this during COVID-19. The tunnel vision of the expert needs to be kept in check by the more general wisdom of the statesman who understands the will of the people. Likewise, the ideas, the brainstorms of the professor need to be balanced against the practical wisdom of the CEO or entrepreneur or business mogul who understands the realities of economics. Bluntly put, people in the business world are forced to develop common sense. Professors are not. So professors benefit from answering to people like yourselves, people who have made their fortunes out in the real world. And it is here, on the question of governance, that serious efforts to reform higher education are most likely to come under attack. If you want a new institution to stay on mission, people like yourselves must retain control over curriculum and hiring. And now, As you may imagine, if you try to do this at an existing institution such as the University of Sydney or the University of Melbourne, the faculty will cry bloody murder and they will insist on the supposed prerogative of academic freedom. But you must not be buffaloed by that. Instead, the answer is to contest this concept. What is the proper scope of academic freedom? Is it absolute, or is it in the service of the common good? If academic freedom is in the service of the common good, as the fact that it is funded by taxpayers suggests that it is, then who determines what that good is? The professors or us? Politically, the Western world is at a tipping point. The population at large has begun to recognize that credentialed experts are not necessarily always trustworthy, right? Housing prices, waves of unwanted immigration, rampant inflation, unsuccessful wars abroad, the abuses of power that we all experienced under COVID-19 have discredited technocratic governance. So the principle of academic freedom is open for debate. The fact that a doctor understands epidemiology does not mean that he should be making decisions on our behalf about economic trade-offs or quality of life, right? So likewise, the fact that a professor may be an expert in sociology or philosophy does not mean that he is better qualified than we are to decide whether our children should be studying the history and culture that makes us who we are, right? The overall question, what it is that we want universities to do, is for us to decide, not the professors. Oh, thanks. So by way of analogy, if I may, imagine if America's armed forces insisted on unfettered military freedom. Imagine if the Joint Chiefs of Staff decided that because they know more about tanks and guns and bombs than the rest of us, they should be the ones to decide whether or not the U.S. should invade Mexico. We would rightly think that they had confused their domain-specific expertise with a more general kind of wisdom, right? Knowing it's great to know how to fly an F-16 fighter jet, but that's not the same thing as knowing whether or not we should risk American lives or Australian lives to protect Ukraine. It's a different kind of decision. Likewise, academic freedom should be understood as extensive but not unlimited. Western militaries owe their success in part to our custom of allowing officers tremendous flexibility in how exactly they carry out their orders. Nevertheless, we insist that soldiers allow their top-level objectives to be decided by a civilian government. The same should be true of the civil service, and the same should be true of academic staff. They can decide the tactics, the nitty-gritty, but we, the people, should decide the overarching strategy. That is to say, the people should decide what the next generation is taught. The people of Australia should decide what the next generation of Australians will learn about their country and about themselves. Okay. So how? Practically speaking, how? Free speech is crucial to the governance of a nation, but it is not a solution to the problem of progressive bias in higher education. Instead, what we need is something more like antitrust legislation, sort of academic trust busting, if you like. We need a spirit of startup-style innovation, and we need, frankly, wealthy and powerful people to provide support and oversight. I think to understand why, it may help to register the difference between a university and a nation. So for most people, their nationality is involuntary. They're essentially trapped where they're born. So it's very important that everyone in a nation has a legal right to speak. Anyone in Australia should be able to set up a soapbox on the corner and say what's on their mind. Or more practically speaking, anyone should be allowed to use a social media platform such as X or Facebook without fear of censorship. A state has enormous power, and that power needs to be kept in check, right? A state like the former Soviet Union, it could put in place an iron curtain that prevented its citizens from escaping. But a university has no such monopoly on force. No one university is the entirety of the public sphere. If people don't like a particular institution, they can leave. They can find a different university, or they can found an alternative, as my colleagues and I have done at the University of Austin. When it comes to universities, what matters is not freedom of speech, but instead freedom of association. Individual students and faculty should be able to choose between many different options. Right now, in the university sector, we have 1,000 flavors of left and 1 or 2 flavors of right. So that balance needs to be adjusted. And that is no small task. That kind of substantive realignment requires more than simply issuing legal protections for freedom of expression. It can only be done by building new institutions or by breaking up the old ones. So to understand, again, why free speech is not, although precious to a nation, is not the answer to the university crisis. It may help to think about what a university actually is. The day-to-day business of a university is nothing other than the regulation of other people's speech. Why does one student get an A and another student get a B? Why is one article published and another not? Why is one subject required and another subject optional? A university is not a democracy. These decisions can't be made by a simple consensus because universities, unlike nations, are not a society of equals. Universities are necessarily hierarchical because they involve the transmission of expertise. They serve an editorial function, like a museum, for instance, that is inseparable from the exercise of unequal authority. Universities also have products that they have to deliver. Sometimes people think of universities as if they were merely debating societies like the Oxford Union. Universities are more like book publishers or movie producers. They are responsible for providing credentials, publications, jobs. So, on the inside, universities have to make all kinds of internal decisions every day about which kind of speech to elevate and which speech to suppress. What does a university put forward? In this sense, the best mental model for understanding how universities actually operate is not Congress or Parliament, but instead a news organization such as Fox or the BBC. All to say, the problem is not exactly that universities are biased. The problem is that too many universities are biased in the same way. Right? Every university is going to be biased in the same way that every news organization is going to have a distinctive slant or take. The problem is they're all slanting in the same direction. And so as a result, students and faculty have the illusion of choice, but remain trapped within what is, in effect, an ideological monopoly. That's why I say we need trust busting. The way to break up that monopoly is not to try to enforce some sort of impossible objectivity or neutrality, but instead to introduce new entrants into the market and force the existing universities to compete. Again, how? Practically speaking, how? In practice, I think you have 3 types of options. One option is residential colleges. The best model I've seen here is the Matthias Corvinus Collegium in Hungary, also known as MCC. MCC offers free housing for high-performing students at Hungary's best universities. The students are not necessarily conservative. Any high-performing student can be taken into one of these colleges, and in exchange for their housing, they are required to complete a supplementary conservative curriculum, participate in leadership training, and attend events where they meet conservative thinkers, policymakers, entrepreneurs, and so on. I can imagine that the residential college system here in Australia might be harnessed to a similar purpose. Another option is to introduce competition within existing universities. This option is the most complex because it requires some degree of political intervention, but it can be done. Across the United States, state legislators have been introducing what have come to be known as schools of civic thought within flagship state-subsidized universities such as Ohio State, the University of North Carolina, the University of Florida, where there's about a dozen of these now, and another half dozen or more in development. I think you'll see one at every major state university in the United States. Each of these schools of civic thought is like a University of Austin introduced within an existing much larger institution. It's like breaking up a company, if you like, that's become a monopoly. And like the University of Austin, they provide an alternative vision of what a university ought to be. What I mean by that is that in addition to advancing technological progress and providing the skills necessary for economic flourishing, part of the purpose of education is to help young citizens who aspire to become a nation's leaders understand the history and distinctive character of our political system and our culture. It's impossible to understand what America is, or Australia, and how it's supposed to work without a deep dive into the history of Greece and Rome and England. Moreover, as Tony was saying, our achievement, carving a civilization out of a savage wilderness, needs to be represented fairly. Yes, we should recognize our missteps, but we should also celebrate our success. Okay, the third option, and the most radical, is what we have done at the University of Austin, which is to build a new university entirely from scratch. We are living proof that it can, in fact, be done. You need the right team. In our case, we had Joe Lonsdale, Barry Weiss, and Neil Ferguson. Joe provided the initial funding and the startup experience. Barry provided the media savvy. Neil provided his years of experience teaching at institutions such as Harvard and Oxford. All three invested enormous time and energy into this project, bringing in other board members, recruiting faculty and students, because they understand how important it is. If we do not fix education, our civilization will be lost. And one institution, if you do it right, can have a powerful effect. Our students are the future Joe Lonsdale, the future Barry, the future Neil. The progressive establishment that we conservatives, in some ways allowed to take over soft power, to take over education and media and the civil service, has shown itself to be hopelessly misguided and corrupt. So it is upon us now to train their replacement. Our task is to build a counter-elite, a new elite to take their place. And in this sense, the effect of the University of Austin is not limited to our own students. In addition, maybe more importantly, we are moving the Overton window of political discourse. For instance, think how the prosperity of Israel challenges the surrounding Arab nations. Think how the mere existence of Taiwan undercuts Chinese propaganda. Likewise, in the university sector, it only takes one elite alternative to show that an alternative is possible. Now, a few years in, we have other universities imitating our signature initiatives. We have Ivy League college presidents visiting us. They call our president, "I need you to succeed because I want to make changes based on the precedent you set." The Trump administration, they talk to us. They look to us as a model of the reforms that they want to see at other universities nationwide. So, you set the one example and it can have this very powerful ripple effect. With that possibility in mind, if any of you are considering starting a new university like the University of Austin here in Australia, my colleagues and I would be delighted to help provide any advice, any support that we can. We would welcome more institutional partners here in Australia. There is strength in numbers, and we are eager to work with you. Oh, great. Okay. We would also welcome Australian students. We are opening up for international applications very soon. We would love to set up something like a new Rhodes Scholarship, introducing future leaders of Australia to American entrepreneurship and connecting them with our shared heritage, the distinctive values and traditions of Western civilization. Our host, I should say as well, our host here, the Institute of Public Affairs, as many of you well know, could be an invaluable ally. While I've been here in Melbourne, I have had the pleasure of teaching for the academy that they host and meeting the young people that the IPA calls Generation Liberty. These young people go out and serve as coordinators, organizing events for conservatives on campuses all across the nation. they're very impressive. Many of them are here tonight. I've seen a few, and I encourage you to meet them, to advise them, and to support them in any way you can. Okay. I'm very grateful to the Institute for this opportunity to speak to you tonight, and I hope that the University of Austin will be a cause for hope as you think through how to bring about similar reforms here in Australia. It can be done. I know the political situation here in Australia, it may look dark at the moment. It looked pretty grim in the United States not too long ago. But things can change. In fact, I would say change is coming. So please take heart, work together, and you can build something new. Thank you.